the ingredients of well-being, and it's on good and evil. So this, of course, is a difficult topic because it depends on one's thought as to what would be considered good and what would be considered evil. So judgment is often, within that. And I can say as well, if we look back in history, things that were once considered evil are now good, and things that are considered good might be now evil. So depending on the particular experience, the very contemplation of good and evil can arouse particularly some deep fears in those who are prone to let emotional considerations get in the way of their understanding and their power of discrimination. So, as I mentioned in my earlier episode in, in the ingredients of well-being, so I was talking about the shadow aspect. So the shadow contains everything that we have established, of course, as being evil. And for that very reason, the shadow itself has to be evil too, right? And it seems like with us human beings to be not only justifiable, but downright necessary on ethical and moral grounds to fight the shadow and eradicate it whenever and however it shows itself. But when we consider the law of polarity has led us to the conclusion that good and evil are two aspects of one and the same unity and are therefore mutually dependent on each other, for their existence. So, good lives on evil and evil lives on good. And, whoever feeds the good also unknowingly is going to be feeding the evil. And the commonly agreed attitude to good and evil within our culture is very largely determined by religions, such as Christianity. I remember, once there was this young lady who approached me and she said, I really, like your religion because, you're always forgiven. And, you could, for example, murder someone and you just get on your knees and you ask for forgiveness. And I said, well, it doesn't really work that way. So, looking into, the Bible or into some of our other religious scriptures, they all give symbols and they give different types of analogies. And we have to look beyond those as well in order to come up with what in our, mind's eye is going to be considered, a balance of our, poles, or our chakras, if you will. But it's this polarity that forces us to pursue our path through the midst of the world of opposites until we've learned and integrated everything we need in order, to once again to become, that perfect being, if you will. But I'll talk about that a little bit more because, we are already perfect in the eye of the Creator. And, but if we look further and say, well, what is sin? Sin is not just one pole of polarity, but polarity itself. And if we go further, which I spoke about sin, often as being more like a mistake or to miss the mark. So it's not that I'm 100% there, something is missing. And so if we look at it that way, then every human act could be considered sinful. So the constant attempt, by believers to commit no sin and to avoid all evil, led to the repression of those areas of behavior, designated as wrong. And so to a powerful, growth of that shadow that I speak of. And that shadow sometimes brings in that fear as well, because we don't go out and explore it. So the pole that we refused to live out always manifests itself in the end, and it generally overtakes the most noble souls, precisely at the moment when they least expect it. And, religion as well has thrown God into the mix. So God was thus, drawn into the world of polarity. And we then, on that evil, at the beginning put a D, and we have the devil. So now God has, as well now, someone who is the opposite. So creating that duality. And if we look at all of the great masters that have been, in our scriptures, rather it be Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Moses, they all teach us to leave the world behind. And what is that meaning of to leave the world behind? Is to find that oneness or that unity that balances us. And then, of course, we become, ever more conscious of the polarity within everything without, shrinking from pursuing our path through the very midst of the conflict that is inherent in, the human nature. And the challenge is not of avoidance, but of redemption through experience. So experiencing also brings us as to our feeling of what we in turn to be right for ourselves, for our soul. And evil is a byproduct of our polar consciousness. So just like time and space, serves to our perception of good, and the very, womb of light itself. For this reason, evil is in no way the opposite of good. Instead, it is polarity itself that is evil or sin, missing that mark, because the world of duality has no natural limit and consequently no independent existence of its own. And we hear sometimes in our scriptures of salvation. So salvation is only found in that oneness with the creation. And consciousness is the word that we apply to, all those human properties and aspects which lie within the light of consciousness and which we can therefore see. And the shadow is the area that's not illuminated, by the light of consciousness and therefore coming dark. So merely looking at the contents of the shadow brings light into the darkness and is sufficient to make the unconscious conscious. So we have to look at all things. So that is the formula, looking at all things on our road to self-realization. Not judging them, not condemning them, putting out an area of passion, which I know sometimes is a bit, difficult. So not only the passion, but the compassion. And it consists in being able to look at everything and to realize that it's perfectly fine just as it is, just as you are, perfectly fine just as you are. And we have to learn to look at everything that exists and everything that happens in our world without letting our ego immediately get involved in considerations either of approval or of disapproval. And we have to learn to contemplate with total peace of mind the whole, manifold of the play. And every value judgment binds us to the world of forms and leads to clinging or to, attachment. So we have to, let those attachments go. So as long as we persist in clinging and holding on to things, we cannot be redeemed from suffering. And like I said in previous videos about how to cure suffering or the cure for suffering, it is to let go of attachment. That's one of the things. And consequently, we remain, unwhole, or we might become ill because of these attachments, because of this clinging, because of this not wanting to have fully taken in what maybe our feelings might be, or that those things that we might consider evil are in themselves may be only a concept. And so if we look at, the things that we might say are, at the same time that we're caught up in our old mirror illusion, that convinced that it is the world itself that is imperfect, and unaware, that it's only our vision that is imperfect in preventing us from seeing the picture as a whole. And so equanimity involves seeking out that midpoint between the polarities, and then contemplating, from this point, the constant altering pulse, of the poles. And it is, the equanimity is, the only attitude that allows us to look at phenomena without judging them. And, determining, hey, whether it be positive or negative. And so it doesn't matter about commandments, laws, or morals, that brings on that perfection, because we have the commandments, we have the laws, we have the constitutions, but none of that brings in perfection. So being law-abiding is, great, but is not sufficient in itself. And we need to keep in mind that, that the devils might also be, believing or trembling or what have you. And so our outward commandments and prohibitions are valid enough, all the while our consciousness is maturing and until we have learned to take full responsibility for ourselves. And so the basic tool for uniting the opposites is love. And that's exactly what the all is, or our creation, or the creator, or this is love. So love doesn't have jealousy, or it doesn't aim to possess. And these are things that we have to bring into our being. So we have to love the good, if we want to call it the good, and we have to love the evil, and then we can say that we have been redeemed. Wishing you all the best in love and light, stay divine, and wishing you all the wholeness with love.